Hackett. I am one of the current ISU Writing Program interns, and I met with Angela last semester to talk with her about the writing that she does for her work, which she is now working at Country Friend Angela, which is just over in Bloomington, and she works in the claims training department there. So you guys have already read a little bit about it, but she's here to talk to you about that today, so please welcome her, and she's got a presentation for you guys.
I think I got around most of you. Came in late. I'm sorry if I didn't formally meet you. Hi, I'm Angela, as she said. I didn't realize before I put this presentation together that you guys had already read the interview, and I don't know why it didn't occur to me that you did that. And I actually completely forgot most of the things I'd said in the interview, so I was like, Annie, can you send me the interview? So, and I read it last night, and I realized that it was like one run-on sentence, and I was like, oh, I feel so sorry for Annie having to transcribe this, because I just never take a break. But I'm going to give you a little bit of a presentation just to have some visuals of some of the things that we talked about in the interview previously. So some of this stuff we might just kind of breeze through a little bit quicker because you've already heard about it. Although, I mean, you guys read that a couple weeks ago, right? So if there's a little bit of a review, will anybody be upset about that? Because you'll be like, oh, yeah, nice reminder, right? Okay, so we'll go ahead and dive in then. Where we're going in this, I'm going to give you a little bit of information about my background, tell you a little bit about my job. We're going to talk a little bit about terminology, just because everybody kind of understands the terms that we use in the writing program slightly differently. So I want to understand how you're understanding them, and I want to give you a little bit of a taste of how I'm understanding them and using these terms throughout the presentation. I want to show you a little bit about uptake genres. Have you guys talked about uptake genres at all?
Not really,
okay.
Not very much.
Every class works a little bit differently, so I'm going to talk a little bit about uptake genres, and then go through a couple of recent projects that I've been working on at work, and that's where we'll go. So we'll go ahead and dive into the background first. Big reason I want to give you some background is because as a writer, or as a human being in general, where you came from kind of informs who you are. So when I'm transferring in new knowledge when I'm in new situations and transferring in knowledge, it's not just from my educational context, but it's from a pretty broad context of formal settings, informal settings. And so I just want to give you a little bit of background about where I come from and what kind of knowledge and transfer I've been using. So I'm originally from Washington, Illinois, and there's pictures that'll pop up. So I'm from Washington, Illinois, which is in the middle part of the state. It's about 45 minutes from here. If you've heard of it, it's probably because there was a great big tornado that went through a couple years ago, so that's what we call the tornado scar. My parents have a photography studio in Washington, Photography by Lee, and that's about right over here, so luckily they were just outside of the tornado path. But I worked for them growing up, and so I learned a lot of graphic design skills. I learned a lot about just composition and photography, so a lot about visual composition, not necessarily the written composition in that context. This is their website that I designed as a part of my one of my classes here at ISU. And then I attended Olivet Nazarene University for my undergrad degree. That is about an hour south of Chicago. It's a little tiny school. I got a BS in English education, and I have a Spanish minor. I also did a semester abroad at Oxford. And then for my master's degree, I studied here. And I did an MA in professional writing, taught English 101 while I was here, and really enjoyed my experience at ISU. Some other jobs I've had, I've been an ESL aide at Kankakee Community College. So what that involved was mostly registering new students in the program. Most of our students in that program spoke either Chinese or Spanish. It was a lot more helpful with the Spanish-speaking students than the Chinese-speaking students, but we got through. I also worked for 2 summers as a kids club coordinator on 2 different Native American reservations. One was the Osage Reservation in Oklahoma, and then another one was the Wind River Reservation in Wyoming, and that has the Eastern Shoshone and Northern Arapaho tribes are located there. I was also an ESL teacher for a summer in Kazakhstan. It's the green one. It's actually like the 9th largest country in the world, but oddly a lot of people haven't heard of it in this part of the world, which is understandable because it's really far away. My first job out of college was working for Walmart. Not as anything exciting. I was in the clothing department, so that was just 3 months out of college. But I actually learned quite a bit there that I still use now. And I also taught Spanish for a couple years. So I was a high school Spanish teacher. It was much easier to find a job teaching Spanish once I finished up that certification than teaching English. And I like to describe that experience as very character building. It was not what I had in mind, but I learned so much from that position and from my students. It was a good experience overall. These days, I am married to the wonderful Daniel Sheets. And here's our selfie at the Lincoln Museum with the statue of Frederick Douglass. So I thought that was a good capture of our personalities. So, and then he's that one, and not Frederick Douglass. So. I'm also really active in my church, Point of Change Church of the Nazarene. I do a lot of curriculum planning. I'm a board member, and right now we're working on starting a Latino ministry. Especially, we're trying to look at starting a Spanish-speaking service, and so, this is Otomar. She'll be leading our service, and right now we like to say, estamos investigando, we're researching. So we're actually doing kind of genre studies approach to figuring out how to start this service by going around and visiting other Spanish-speaking services in town. So, and those are her two boys who are incredibly cute, right? So, can't go wrong there. So a little bit about my job. I work as a training developer in the claims training department. My department serves about, I went on our organization count and had to count them. We serve about 1,000 employees. So we have 600 who are in field claims, and I talked about this a little bit in the interview, that those employees are a lot of times working on cars, or they're just kind of really interesting environments. So like when we're sending out communication and stuff, we really have to kind of keep in mind the environment that they're working in. Our casualty and liability claims employees, a lot of them are working on the phone all day long. So that's just a completely different environment than the first set. So the first set might be climbing up on roofs, and then these ones have like a headset on all day long. So pretty different groups and ecologies that they're working in that we're communicating to and designing training for. So the things that I do online and classroom course design. So I've designed courses in safety, commercial roofing, which was really interesting, and then after that, every time we went by a roof, I was like, I wonder what kind of roof that is. Is that a modified bitumen roofing? And then my family makes fun of me. Farm machinery, comparative negligence, which I'll talk about a little bit more later, so if you're not sure what that is, don't worry. Recorded statements, so if you were in an auto accident, for example, your insurance adjuster would have you take a recorded statement probably to just kind of figure out what happened in the accident. And right now, a big project I'm working on is the auto new hire class. So this is for our new adjusters who come in and are settling auto claims. So we're just completely revamping what could be anywhere from about a 4-week course. So that's a pretty big one to revamp. I also do a lot of communications and information management. So I do change communication plans. So when we have a big change coming in, today, for example, we had this huge project that rolled out that has been in the works ever since I started. So since before I started, so there were a lot of communications involved in getting that one started. I do department websites. We use SharePoint. Are you guys familiar with SharePoint? So you mostly knows SharePoint is it's a Microsoft Office program, and it's mainly for facilitating document exchange. But you can also kind of pretty it up and make it look like a website. It's not like the most cooperative platform ever, but that's what we use because that's what we have. Claims exchange is something we talked about in the article, but I'll show you some pictures of it later. But before we get too far into some examples from the workplace, though, I want to talk a little bit about terminology. So I want to hear, first of all, how you guys define these terms. And uptake, I know you guys said you maybe haven't used that much yet, but how would you guys define each of these terms? So we're just going to have some audience participation now, and tell me about how you understand these terms. And Irene, you're not allowed to answer.
Okay.
Uptake. Do we know anything about uptake? All right. We'll get to that. Come back to that one then. Transfer. What have we talked about with transfer?
One place to another.
One place to another. Transferring what?
Information, understanding.
Information, understanding. Yeah. Any other thoughts on transfer? That's one, you said you guys haven't talked about transfer a lot.
Uptake and we've done activity system, ecology, and genre.
Okay, so I started off with the 2 hard ones that you guys haven't done yet. So, what about activity systems? Tell me about activity systems.
Like chat, if I can give you a hint.
Hints are acceptable, but no more than that.
Okay.
And a motto from when I taught Spanish was be strong and be wrong. So it's okay if your statement is not completely accurate, but taking a stab at it is encouraged. Yes, Larry.
Just all the components that go into creating a product of a genre itself.
Give me an example.
Maybe the production of it, or who manufactured it, how it's distributed along the real road, et cetera, et cetera.
Yep, so lots of different actors involved. True. Anyone else have a definition of an activity system? I like yours, by the way. I'm not saying that we need another one just because. I just think more definitions are better, right?
More than
More the better, right? Yes.
Isn't it just like everything that contributes kind of to the final product, like everything that you have to do to make it seemingly feasible?
I agree with that. All right, what about ecology?
The environment and factors that contribute to the final product.
Other definitions of ecology. We have the environment factors that contribute to the final product. Any other thoughts on ecology? All right. Oh, yes.
Doesn't ecology like talk about the efficiency of something kind of too?
It could. I think that could be a factor. Any other thoughts on ecology? What about genre? The big one, right?
They know genre.
But you're halfway through the semester and it's like, I'm not entirely sure I know what this is anymore because we talked about it so much, right? Yes, Larry.
we see it more as a word, like we see it more as a common word that we so commonly use that we really don't like know a general definition on top of our head. But if anything, I'll describe it as maybe an activity or a system that is described by different components that set it apart from other types of systems, activities, et cetera, et cetera. So it has its own distinct components to it.
Okay.
Kind of like a certain way of showing something, or like different ways of showing one thing, or saying one thing. That makes sense to me.
Okay. Like a category of ways of saying something? Okay. Other definitions of genre, since I know you've talked about this one, right? Yeah. Variations of different topics, okay. Yeah.
Like, this isn't necessarily a definition, but it fits the criteria for what like a genre is supposed to be. So like something will fall into this category because it has all these things similar with whatever else is in its group. So it's just like a way of categorizing types of literature in this sense.
So, like, could we say like sets of things with shared conventions? Do you guys
Yeah.
use the word conventions? Yeah. So that could work. Yeah. And I'm gonna limit it just to literature. I'm my focus in grad school anyway was on technical communications, so I'm not necessarily like a lit lover. I like it. Okay, it's fine. Sorry, I don't mean, are you a lit person?
No, I'm writer.
Okay, excellent. So I didn't insult any like huge Shakespeare lovers. All right, I'm going to give you a couple definitions that I use, and these are not the absolute definitions. These are the ones that I had in my head when I was making this handout. So it's not even the definitions that I like all the time. It's just the ones I happen to be thinking of at the moment I'm writing this. So we're going to look these over. Just because these are terms that I will be using throughout this presentation, and I want to make sure I'm going to give you a fourth one, that we're kind of on the same page. Or in different pages is fine too. Here you go, just in case you want one. All right. Okay, so again, not the definitions, but some definitions. Uptake, this was one of my favorites in the program. And it's the process we go through to take up a new idea and think about it until it makes sense. I think that actually may have been one of my students' definitions, and I liked it, so I stole it. So I'm sorry, I should have cited that. I'll tell him later. Uptake genres are texts that allow us to explore and to some extent control how we're learning and transferring. With uptake genres, and I'll be talking about those quite a bit here in a minute, these are texts that I use to kind of explore how am I thinking about this. Not what am I thinking about it, but how am I thinking? Am I thinking of it in the right way? Have you heard that phrase, work smarter, not harder? Kind of a a little bit of a cliche. Yeah, so Uptake kind of helps with that in my job because a lot of times I'll have, for example, a lot of material that I have to learn in order to like put it into a new training module or something, and so Uptake allows me to think about, am I learning this in the most efficient way possible? What are some possible ways that I could be researching or exploring this? So Uptake is thinking about, a lot of thinking about your thinking, I guess, is one way to describe it. It's a little bit, I think it shares a lot in common. Have you heard the term metacognition? I know I have some future teachers in the world who will hear that word, metacognition, in your teacher training at some point. Transfer, using an antecedent, which is a previous or similar knowledge in new situations. So that might be using an antecedent genre. Have you guys talked about antecedent genres? So like if I am writing this new thing, maybe I have a genre that I've written before that's similar, and so I'm kind of drawing on that previous experience as I'm writing this new text, right? Or sometimes it happens on accident. So you set out to write this thing and then you realize that like your previous writing experiences have informed how you're writing this thing, and you actually end up writing it wrong because you were like, oh, I know how to write things, and then you started writing and then you realized that this previous genre knowledge is informing how you're writing this new thing, and that's not actually what was expected from the new thing. Sometimes that happens, right? So for example, when you go into a new class, you write a paper and you're like, this was the kind of paper that my last teacher liked, and then you turn it in and your new teacher is like, this is not what I'm looking for at all. This is an example of when we're transferring in prior genre knowledge that is not appropriate in the new situation. So you're kind of having to explore and figure out what's appropriate in the new place. Activity systems. I like to describe, my definition for this is all the actors, which could be, and by actors I could mean like people, things, or ideas that work together to do something, which is the activity. So for example, if I'm writing a reminder to myself, I would have my Post-it, my pen, my desk that I'm writing it on, because that's kind of important, because otherwise I have to like try to balance, which is a pain. Or I could write it on my hand, but then my hand would also be one of the actors. My body is probably one of the actors. Let's see, so all of these things that kind of go and work together to make this activity of writing this Post-it note work. Let's think of another one, like brushing your teeth. What are the actors involved in that activity system? Yes?
Toothbrush.
Toothbrush is fine. Shout them out. We don't have to do hand raising. Toothpaste.
Hands.
Hands, yep. Water, yep. What? Your teeth? Yes. That's a good point. Yeah, sorry, what?
The same.
The sink, yep. What else? I heard a mumble over here, but
Bathroom.
the bathroom, yes. Any other things? We could really go infinitely with this, because we could talk about like the water sewage treatment plant and like the pipes and the fact that my city has regulations for purifying water, and so like those rule books and things actually could all be contributing factors to me brushing my teeth, but sometimes we like to just like limit it and not have to look at everything because then our heads start to spin, right? So ecology, the environment where texts are produced, used or distributed and consumed. I also like to think of ecology not just in terms of where the text is created, but also where the text is going to be used. And I talked about that a little bit with the environment where my readers a lot of times are working in. I have to think a lot about how do they prefer to consume texts. So ecology is a big thing for me. Genre, a couple of my definitions of genre is a text that makes a particular action or set of actions possible or impossible. So for example, if I sent you an invitation, it would be possible for you to show up at the same place at the same time with a reasonable expectation of what you were there for. So if I sent you all the wedding invitation, then you'd show up hopefully at the same place at the same time and know that you're there for a wedding. So a counterexample would be if my landlord had a no pets policy, then it would be impossible for me to have pets in my apartment. Well, not impossible, but probably just a really bad idea, right? I also like the idea that a genre is a stable for now category of text. So we can say like a takeout menu, for example. But takeout menus have changed over time, and the conventions that are on a takeout menu have changed. So for example, if you looked at a takeout menu from the early 90s, none of them had websites listed on them because we were like, the internet, it's a new thing, and like no one's into that. Trying to figure out if it was going to catch on, right? So that's another definition that I like for genre. And then since I used the word text in my definition for genre, I thought I'd also define text. So it's a bonus term that I didn't include on PowerPoint a second ago, but it's a thing used to make meaning, and it may or may not contain words. So we could, for example, say that the statues outside this building are a text of some sort. Or we could say that this piece of paper is a text. Speaking of this text, why would I have chosen to give you a handout with these terms? What's the advantage of this genre over doing it a different way? Yeah?
It's a constant reminder.
It's a constant reminder, sure. What else? Some affordances of this genre.
Take it with you.
You can take it with you. Yep. What else?
It's recyclable.
Sure. Yep.
It's right next to you, so it's like more on a personal level.
Yep, sure. That's interesting too. Yeah, you could also mark your own ideas on it, so it could be like a text that invites conversation. Yes.
It's made into a list, so it's easy just to like go one by one and focus on certain ones you need to.
That's true. So like there's kind of a genre within the genre. Like the handout itself is a little bit of a big category for a genre, but yeah. Another thought that I had was that I'm going to be proceeding through this presentation from now on, but I will probably refer back to these terms. So if I just had these terms on the slide, after they go away, it was like, if you memorized them, great, but if not, sorry, you're out of luck, right? So that's why I chose to do it this route. I don't want to be taking up too much time just doing this, so.
It's 4.
4? Okay. So we will buzz through these next few things. All right. All right, so a little bit about uptake genres then. So as I mentioned, uptake genres are a really big part of the process that I use. I started using uptake genres heavily, to my knowledge, during my thesis. I think I've always kind of used them in certain ways. Other things that I would maybe describe as uptake genres possibly might be like notes sometimes could be an uptake genre. Sometimes I use scratch paper a lot as an uptake genre, so if you're more of a math person, like sometimes your scratch paper might be a little bit of an uptake genre because it allows you to process your thinking. Or if you've ever talked about like process genres at all, a lot of times process genres are kind of uptake genres. So if you've used genres before that help you organize your thoughts before you start to write something, for example, and you're thinking about, okay, what's the best way to organize this content? Some of those sorts of things could be an uptake genre. So I started using uptake genres heavily during my thesis writing process. What I would do then was, because writing a thesis is kind of daunting because it's a lot of things to write. And so when I'd sit down to work on it, I'd be like, I don't want to do this because it's a lot of things to do. And so I would sit there and write about for 5 minutes, these are the things I'm going to do today. It's just small things. But doing that and just kind of getting a list of like, these are the small things I'm going to work on today for 5 minutes before starting to work actually kind of helped me get into it and put off procrastination. I've heard that, my theory is that a lot of times procrastination happens when you don't actually have an idea of what you're doing. So like in your head, you're like, I know how to do this, but it's kind of fuzzy and I don't know where to start. Usually if you actually know very definitively where to start, you don't procrastinate quite as much because you're like, oh yeah, I can do this thing, I can knock that out. So a couple of uptake genres that I use a scratch paper notebook, which I'll have some pictures of that in a second, and then a process log. So that one's actually a shared genre that I use, shared text that I use with a coworker. So as we're going throughout a research process, we're kind of putting in our plans and our research there. The uptake genres I've used them to process how I'm thinking, exploring what I do and don't understand. That's one of my absolute favorite things is figuring out what you don't understand. Because I was thinking about it yesterday and I was like, well, until you can ask a good question, you can't find answers to it. So figuring out what you don't understand is actually getting to a point where you understand a fair amount. So it's kind of funny because I think our writing program guest speaker in the fall talked about how experts ask good questions, but novices don't really. And so I think once you've got to the point where you know how to ask a good question, you've actually learned quite a bit, even though it seems like in this fuzzy beginning stage that you're like, I don't really know things at this point, but then once you've got to the point where you have a question, you still don't necessarily know the final answer, but you're on your way to getting there. So identifying what you don't know to me is a really big step. Thinking through steps in an activity or a process, considering different research options, what are the best modes of research I could use to approach a general project. Genre selection and research, I still do genre research because I use a lot of different genres all the time, so exploring them is helpful to me. So these next couple slides, like I said, a common theme that I use in my uptake genres is identifying what I don't know. So these next 5 slides or so were just, I went through my notebook and I like highlighted, okay, where were all the times that I identified what I didn't know. So here's one, I'm a little confused about ... Then here's one, I'm having trouble writing this section, something doesn't seem to fit. Blanking on what to do to prep for what to present to Brad and Paul. Brad is my supervisor and Paul is my manager. And then I'm kind of paralyzed on this one right now. Part of it is I think I'm thinking of something else right now. So, okay, so how do I get going on this safety script that I have to write? And I think that one was a lot in the interview, so you probably saw a lot about that. Okay, I need to work on this RS recorded statements stuff right now, and I'm intimidated by it for several reasons. Does anyone else have that feeling like you sit down to write something and you're like, I don't want to do this, I don't know what I'm doing? Am I the only one that feels that way? Okay, a couple. Any others that feel that way about writing sometimes? Yes, others? Good. Okay, sorry, I'm not alone. Although maybe it's discouraging to think like, oh, that feeling never goes away. This next couple slides, I used my notes also for visual genre research. So again, a genre doesn't necessarily have to be about words. So a lot of the genres that I do, and again this is stemming back to that a little bit of a graphic design background, are visual genres. So this was, my manager gave me, asked for a document that shows the relationship between our big corporate objectives for the year and then our claims division goals and then our individual department goals. So I did some Google image searching and I was looking for, because I was kind of inventing a genre. It wasn't really necessarily a thing that is a genre before. But I'm looking at different, what can I steal from other genres about visual relationships between things. So for example, I'm like, well, I can show relationships by different shapes, I can connect them by lines. I can, or I thought about, okay, well, with what we're doing, we're using kind of a hierarchy structure, but we could also spin that hierarchy instead of just showing it horizontally, because then I run into the issue that it won't fit on a piece of paper if I put it all straight in a row. So again, here looking at the different ways that I can show relationships visually, I was like, well, I could put them close together, so that would show a relationship. I could use colors, so there would be kind of a connection between things of the same color. I could use different shapes. So I was looking at those different options. I tried this version of it, which I didn't really like, where I kind of grouped things together, and I was like, well, if here's the corporate goal, and then the individual department goals, we can kind of see the connection with the colors. So that was one option. Then I tried this option where I kind of did them a little bit more in a hierarchy, but then kind of showed the similarities closer together. And then I thought about some different ways to do it. What I didn't like about this option was that the color didn't go all the way through. And then this was what I ultimately landed on. I haven't actually designed the document, the final document yet, because we're still waiting on some of the individual goals to be developed. But what we're going to do is show with color kind of the progression from our corporate objectives, and then like the next level down, and then our vice president of claims, and then our 2 directors of claims, and then the individual department goals within those. So kind of our departments would be spread around all over. So I think I talked about this a little bit in the article, if you remember, the interview, if you remember. I was having issues writing a safety script. And my final product was going to be a module. So this isn't my final product, this is like the thing before my process genre for the final product. I was figuring out that I was having issues writing it because I didn't know how to display in the previous, using the previous format that I had for script writing. I couldn't display all the things that I was trying to, so I actually had to come up with a new format for my process genre to be able to write to be able to create my final genre. So I added a couple columns that I hadn't necessarily had on previous scripts that I'd written for other modules. So you sometimes have to reinvent your process genres to be able to get your final genres to turn out right. Here's just kind of a couple sketches of the comparative negligence module, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. There's another one. For that module, we ended up doing kind of a story structure throughout the whole thing, and it was about Jack and Jill who got in a car accident, and now they're suing each other over damages. So. Or Jack and Jill. Another thing that I've been doing a lot lately is making lists of the steps in my process, because as I talked about when I was writing my thesis, I found that like, okay, step 1, write a thesis. That's too big. I don't know how to just write a thesis. But I know how to do these itty-bitty tiny things in that process. And so I'm finding that with my bigger projects, if I can break it down into smaller parts, like really small parts, then I can usually get through that. And then I'm actually finding that I'm using those process sheets over and over again. So what I did on one module, I go back and I look at my process genre, and think about, okay, how can I process through writing this new script for this new module that I'm developing? So a couple projects that I've done. Any questions or thoughts about uptake genres first, since I know that's an area you guys haven't talked about a lot? Do you find that you use uptake genres at all in your own experience? That you maybe just didn't call uptake genres?
I think we kind of did that at the beginning of the semester, like when we first started learning about chat. And not like necessarily in like a stream of thought, but we would open up news articles and like we would think about all the components of chat. So like it wasn't necessarily